Moving on to our next panel speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Sangeeta Singh. With 24 years of teaching experience, she has led a number of research projects related to ecological planning, urban planning, disaster resilience, sustainable development, and gender mainstreaming. She holds a PhD in urban planning, specializing in eco-cities. So today she is here sharing with us our expert opinion on how we can connect with nature in our cities and how we can restore our ecosystem. So please welcome Professor Dr. Sangeeta Singh.
Thank you very much, Niharika. And thank you very much for inviting me to this important meeting today. So can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay, let me share my slides. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about restoring nature in cities. And let me just go on with my slides. So I have 15 minutes, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So we are talking about cities in the 21st century. We say that 21st century is already the age of the cities. So we are producing more and more cities, and of course, this is being focused more on in developing countries at the moment, and especially in Asia and Africa. And if you consider Nepal has become one of the fastest urbanizing country in Southeast Asia, with 66% of its area being urban at the moment. So while we are building more cities, we are more and more excluding nature and causing imbalance in the natural ecosystem. So this is what we have been doing, but this does not mean that we need to curb the cities, but it also means that we need to plan our cities in balance with nature. Now, of course, this has to do with the economic evolution. To a certain extent, we started from the hunter stone ages with the economic output, which was very less. But then, with the innovation, we started to have economic evolution. And now we are in the age of the knowledge engineering. And we have made tremendous progress with regard to how we are planning our cities in terms of including all sorts of innovation and so on, but we are moving further and further away from nature while we are doing it. So you can see that from the hunter-gatherer man that we began, we had a lot of innovations, and now we are techno-savvy people of the 20th century. And we are talking about the Internet of Things, robotics, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and whatnot. So that also means that the resource consumption level has gone very, very high. So if you look at the sustainability issues in all these different types of cities that we have been planning from the ancient times till now, we see that there has been increased resource consumption and, of course, increasing exclusion of nature. From the ancient cities to the medieval, to the industrial, to the different approaches of garden city, radiant city, or whatever. So we can see that there's the more we are developing our new modern cities, we are excluding nature more and more. So when we are talking about cities of future, I think we need the whole global agenda is focusing on sustainability at the moment. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goal number 11, consisting of sustainable cities and communities, then we are also talking about restoring nature into the cities. So we say that cities have to be planned in balance with nature. And that, of course, it has to have a high living quality, but it doesn't mean that we are compromising only on the environment, but also we are, talking about social progress. We are talking about economical progress. We are talking about cultural efficiency and so on and so forth. So all these triple bottom line needs to be met if we are to talk about the sustainable cities. And of course, there have been many attempts, starting from Rachel Carson in 1962, when she was writing this book on the Silent Spring, and ranging from Schumacher to Ian McHarg, also Doxiadis talking about acoustics. We had Paolo Soleri talking about arcology, and then of course the man behind the eco-cities, Richard Register, talking about cities that has to be planned in balance with nature, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the different attempts, it seems like, there have been attempts to include nature into the cities. And if you look at Ebenezer Howard, he has been talking about incorporating greenery into the cities, whereas Le Corbusier has been, sort of trying to maximize on the open spaces by going vertical. And of course, there was this 1 acre city contemplated by Frank Lloyd Wright and so on. So these were some of the attempts that have been done. Whereas if you look still far beyond in the ancient practices, we can see that there are many sort of philosophies that actually have been aimed at bringing nature into the cities, ranging from Hippodamus to Socrates to Aristotle to Vitruvius. So if you consider it in the West, whereas in the East also, of course, in our cities, we have been talking about the identity of the city. And in the Eastern world, this has been guided by a lot of religious and sociocultural belief systems to a certain extent. So imageability and identity have been guided by a lot of sociocultural belief systems, which has also helped in placemaking, of course. So nature and natural resources have been an integral element in planning the cities and neighborhood. And they have played a very key role in defining the urban form as well. As you can see in all the ancient documents that have been written, from Manasara Shilpa Shastra to, all these different documents where they have been talking about various types of planning. And we can see that if you look at the plannings, different plans that have been perceived, it is to a certain extent done in order to maximize benefit of nature. So this has been a regular part of our ancient design, including the Vastu Shastra. And of course, as I already mentioned, that nature and natural resources have always played a key role. And if you look at the settlement patterns way back during the Lichavi period, as we might call it, we have always focused on compact settlement, which have been either temple-centric or palace-centric. And there have been attempts to, incorporate the built domain and, to incorporate nature to a certain extent, to conserve the nature, to preserve it, and to live alongside nature. So this has been the main doctrine always. So if you look at the planning systems, you can see that the human domain was always in areas that were not good for nature. Let's say it was the areas that were not good for agriculture, not good for forest, would be the human domain or the built domain mostly. And this is still reflected in the land use plans even today. So this is one of the ancient settlements, traditional settlements, but even now you can see that this aspect is still maintained, with the core areas being very compact, the built domain being very compact, whereas it is still surrounded by the agriculture area and the forest domain. So this is still seen in some of the traditional settlements, whereas if you look at some of the traditional settlements, like for example Saku, we see that this sort of compactness is still being maintained. And this was based on the Vedic and cosmic principles, of course. And if you analyze all these different principles, you find that, this was an attempt to include nature into the cities. For example, they would be talking about, having the ponds and, building, water spouts and so on and so forth. And so it was a sort of an unwritten doctrine mandating that you have to build all these different elements into the cities, otherwise something bad would happen. So this used to be the philosophy. And if you look into the detail, then has been mainly to incorporate nature into the cities. And of course, we nowadays talk about limiting the growth of urban areas. And in the ancient times, it was already, they already knew about the compactness of the settlements that needs to be maintained. And so as a matter of fact, they, placed some goddesses along the peripheral areas of the city so that it does not extend. So the unwritten doctrine would be that if you build beyond those Astamatrikas or the goddesses, then some bad curse would happen and so on and so forth. So that was a sort of a bylaw by means of which people, built inside those boundaries. So the cities were compact, and even they had the gates, and these gates were a sort of the ones that were delimiting the urban growth in the areas. And of course, it is also interesting to note that all the important natural resources were being governed by some sort of socio-cultural traditions. They would have some sort of important religious elements placed in the forest or water bodies or wherever, so that these were maintained, and the sort of the natural resources were respected, so to say. So this was one of the methods in which they tried to incorporate nature into the cities. So if you see in areas where there are forests or where there are water bodies, they placed one idol, and then they said that this has to be worshipped, and so on and so forth. So this is the trend which is usually seen in case of the traditional settlement planning, in especially in and around Kathmandu. So they placed all these goddesses so that the settlements do not extend. But in this case, this is this area is the city limit, but then this is the city limit. They have the inner Astamatrikas, but here the outer Astamatrikas have been placed in the natural, in areas where there are natural resources, so as to preserve them. So this has been an interesting feature which is there. And of course, if you place a temple in the forest, then people are visiting there, and there are socio-cultural linkages and so on, which are sort of tying the people and the places also together by means of socio-cultural traditions. So eventually there were celebrations, wherever there were natural resources, like, for example, alongside the rivers, in the forest, and so on. Even in the agricultural fields, there were some socio-cultural traditions that were binding. And of course, these natural resources were also, to a certain extent, sort of binded by the linkages created by the festivals. So they said that if a temple is located in a distant forest, then they would say that this goddess needs to visit the city, and then it needs open spaces, for example, where the goddess would come and have to rest. So these are places, the open spaces and courtyards, which are very big in size, and where people can agglomerate and have festivals and so on and so forth. So there were stories linked, which sort of linked the places together, not only the places, but also the different ethnic groups. For example, if you look over here, where the temple is located, there another an ethnic group resides, whereas in the city core, another ethnic group resides. So they said that there has to be some sort of linkages. So by means of festivals, they are a sort of tying it up. So these are some of the interesting features that are seen in the traditional settlements. And so there were, sort of sociocultural norms and standards that ensured that there is multicultural coexistence as well. So this is how people were using spaces, and of course being close to nature. So this is a festival where the goddess is being brought from the forest temple where it resides and bringing it into the core area of the city, into the open spaces for celebration. And so even the coexistence is created, by means of having different ethnic groups participate in these sorts of festivals. So these are seen in all of the traditional settlements that are there. And of course, so for the festivals to happen, and also for the the deities to travel, they said that you need open spaces inside the area. So this is an unwritten doctrine saying that the open spaces are required, and various sorts of open spaces are designed that are, of course, meant to be ecologically significant. Not only does it cater to disaster resilience, but also ecologically significant in the sense that it caters to the microclimate, of course. But if you look at the nature of the open spaces that are built, you always have open jointed pavements, which allows water to seep inside. So water becomes an integral part of the space that has been designed. Even if you look at the pavements and streets, these are also open jointed. And so this means that places and cities are accommodating the water. So nature is a part of cities. So it is not excluded as we are doing in the modern day. So so this is just to show that even the water-centered ecological infrastructure was placed in such a manner that it contributes to the ecological aspects in terms of water recharging and so on and so forth. So there are special requirements saying that ponds have to be built for sociocultural traditions. They say that once you enter a certain settlement, you have to be welcomed by 2 ponds on either side of the road. And that's how they started to build. Some are related to the festivals and so on. So that means to say that, they do not say that as a standard, you need to build ponds, but then it is linked with the sociocultural traditions. So this is how the spaces and places were sort of maintained, also with regard to different sociocultural traditions linked with the maintenance of water and so on. Also with regard to biodiversity, the sort of importance of biodiversity was well realized, and it was incorporated in the design itself. So if you see, water inclusive urban spaces were part of the cities during that time, whereas now we are talking about centralized water system, excluding it from our cities, getting water from far and far away, and then throwing it far away. So that means we are more and more into excluding nature, excluding water, excluding forest, and so on and so forth, whereas we had this culture of inclusion in the previous times. So if you look at the whole system of what is happening, is that we have the natural ecosystems, but with urbanization and cities, we are disturbing it, creating wastewater, creating all sorts of heat island, ozone depletion, and so on and so forth. So the only remedy, I think, would be to have cities that are planned in balance with nature. But how can this be done is a big question, of course. And what we could be thinking of is to have the natural ecosystem cycles undisturbed and having a closed urban ecocycle on ecosystem of its own. For example, if the urban ecosystem is maintaining its own cycle in terms of recycling and so on and so forth, it could to a certain extent leave the natural ecosystem cycles alone and thrive on its own. So both can thrive close together. So this is including nature in cities would mean that we are not only talking about open spaces and parks, but also including water, forest, agriculture into the urban areas, into the cities. And it need not be on a very, very big scale. It could even be in the neighborhood scale. For example, this is one of the neighborhood initiatives where people were using, the people in Kirtipur, for example, were using Minecraft as a tool for engaging the youth in designing their spaces. So here they have used the Minecraft game in order to, design, revitalize a pond, and they wanted to, see how it would look like. So everybody were participating in the design competition. And then it created a sort of an interest amongst the youngsters as well. And it came as a surprise that, when the youngsters were participating in, so that was in the pond design, but here in the open space design, what they found out was that they need a mobile charger, which is powered by solar panel. So this would not have been thought of if, the youngsters were not involved. So these have been some of the So this could be some of the innovative mechanisms by means of which, the spaces could be designed in a participatory manner. So this is one of the examples of how, the open space was designed in a participatory manner, including youth and women, elderly, everybody were engaged in identifying the spaces. So to summarize what could be the way forward in restoring nature in the cities, of course, there are a lot of things that we can talk about, including blue and green infrastructure, going for water-sensitive urban design. So all these different urban, incorporating urban agriculture, urban forest, ponds and wetlands, rain gardens, and creative solutions with regard to having green walls and living walls and so on. So if you look at so I'm not going to go into the details of all of this because I think already short of time. Even in case of Kathmandu, restoring the water networks is also an important factor, because if you look at the Kathmandu Valley, it is there's a whole network of rivers which also associates a lot of open spaces. So incorporating nature would mean that we need to revive the rivers as well as the open spaces related to it. So this could be one of the mechanisms by means of which we could be reviving our spaces, and the future cities might, of course, look like this in the absence of a lot of spaces. This might be how our cities in future would look like, with greenery, being incorporated in all over the places. And this has already started to happen, I think. So this was in Belgium, that this sort of, incorporation. So these are taking shape nowadays. So this is a city in China, whereas this is, of course, how urban forests could also be incorporated. So this is how maybe we could, include cities, nature into the cities. Thank you.